For most people, buying a newspaper is part of the daily routine and is often taken for granted. However, what many of us fail to realise is the amount of time, effort and manpower that goes into our daily read. For the Coventry Evening Telegraph, the day starts with the loading of the 2-ton rolls of newsprint onto the Goss printing press. Meanwhile, upstairs in the newsroom, the reporters start to sift through the dozens of stories that have come in overnight. For Sue Lowry, crime reporter, the day really begins when she arrives at Coventry's Little Park Street police station for a briefing with Detective Inspector Matt Sawyers.
It's been busy then.
This has been busy.
Do you hope?
I'll perhaps deal with the one major job first,
Right.
which is a job at Tandy's in Fairfax Street, the electrical premises.
Yeah.
Just in a nutshell, at about 5 to 6 yesterday, 3 white men went into the shop as the premises were being closed, and the security girls were being put on the doors, just closing up.
Yeah.
The 2 shop assistants were attacked and bound, and money stolen. I'll say to you now, so I'm going to give you some sort of broad brush details,
Yeah.
as opposed to fine details, because the 2 shop...
The purpose of this daily meeting is for Sue to find out about the incidents that have occurred during the last 24 hours and to be updated on stories on which she's previously reported.
Did you say did they have any covering their faces?
Detective Inspector Matt Sawyers, you just briefed Sue Lowry on a local crime. From the point of view of the police, how important is it and what do you hope that will achieve for you?
From the point of view of the police, it's important that we use all the available media outlets to appeal for witnesses in particular, in order to excite a response from members of the public to come forward and tell us what they've seen.
You say all the available media outlets. These days you have Crime Watch on television, you've got local radio, but the newspaper still has a job to do, does it?
Yes, of course, the newspaper still has a job to do for itself and for its readers, and the police are a natural generator of stories for them. It's very much a two-way street. The paper can often help us with things wider than just the story itself. We've taken part in any number of investigations where the Coventry Evening Telegraph, for instance, have run a poster campaign for us. They ran one in relation to the missing woman, Kelly Finn, that produced 200 posters for us very quickly with a broad headline and a photograph. So that was very helpful, and they've done that on a number of occasions for us.
So do you tell the newspaper reporter everything at the start, or do you hold some information back?
We don't often tell. We don't often hold a lot back. Usually, if we do, I usually say so. I've said in relation to a press briefing this morning that I wasn't going to give detail about what the witnesses were bound with, and there are sound operational reasons for that. Generally speaking, I say if I'm holding something back.
And establishing a good relationship with a reporter like Sue Lowry is obviously important for you because you build up a trust and confidence, presumably.
It's important for both sides. Perhaps in the past the relationship hasn't been as good as you know is useful both for them and for us. What we've tried to do in recent years is through one particular reporter to build up that trust, so that any perceived sort of problems or tension between conflicts of interest are often resolved by virtue of knowing each other.
It's now 8:30 and the printers manually feed the newsprint through the press, ready for the first run of the day. Each roll will be printed on both sides with a total of 16 pages. Cut and folded with the other sheets, and a 64-page paper will be produced. By 9:30, everything should be set up and ready to run.
Hello, can I have news desk, please?
The meeting now over, Sue's first job is to phone the news editor with brief details of the story.
Hi, Sue, can I speak to Pete around, please? Pete, hiya, there's been quite a nasty robbery at Tandy's in Fairfax Street. Yeah, they, 3 guys walked in just as it was closing and they bound and covered the faces of the 2 assistants in there. They didn't get away with much, but, you know, it doesn't happen very often, does it?
By 10 a.m, most of the stories that will make the final edition have either been written or phoned through. At exactly 10 o'clock, the paper's editor holds a meeting with his senior staff to find out which stories, photographs and other items will go to make up this edition. Peter Mitchell, the news editor, runs through the main stories that he will print today.
First edition we led with the story about the George Eliot Hospital. The story on the front is a basic news story. The latest we've got is that the fire brigade is saying that it's of doubtful origin. Sue's come in with quite a good story from police calls this morning. It's quite unusual, this, really. I don't think we've had one of these for quite a while. 2 shop assistants were bound and blindfolded by a gang just as Tandy's was shutting up last night. Unusual that they bound and blindfolded them, really. That's quite
dramatic stuff.
Yeah, I don't think they escaped with too much money because, well, they escaped with whatever was in the till. It was obviously not that much on that day, but yeah, it's a little bit unusual. So we'll be trying to get a chat with the firm, see if the assistants will play ball for an interview and what have you. Make us a good thing for City Farm, I thought. After that, what we've got the...
Neil, we've just seen you chairing the meeting. What is the role of an editor in a newspaper like the Evening Telegraph?
Basically, I'm in charge of all the content of the paper on a day-to-day basis. So I don't read everything that's in there. I rely on the department heads, the news editor, the features editor, the sports editor and the picture editor to get their own functions together, and it's for me to really try and pull the strings together at the end of the day.
So you coordinate all the other activity in the production process, do you?
To some extent, yes. I mean, there's obviously a production director who's looking after the nuts and bolts end of printing the papers, but as far as getting the paper to the press on time, and with everything in it that should be in it, then that's down to me.
It's often said that bad news sells a newspaper. Is that true?
Bad news sells a few extra newspapers, is more true. We sell something approaching 90,000 copies of the paper every day. More or less irrespective of what's in it. We may sell a few more if there's one particularly dramatic bad news story. But they're just a few casual sales that top things up. We're not really into the idea of bad news. I think if you look at the paper, there's in fact about 90% of the stories are either good news or informational, aren't bad news at all. The fact is that the bad news often gets on the front page because it's the most dramatic. And people may think, oh, they're only interested in bad news. That's not the case. We try to project some of the good news as well, and we've got good feedback as well from people who say, you know, I've had enough of this recession, it's great to see a nice bright picture on the front page. So we do try and give everybody a mix.
Armed with all the available information, Sue returns to the Telegraph offices. So, Sue, how far have you got with your story that we saw you with the police earlier on today?
Right, well, when I got back to the office, I got a photographer and the 2 of us went out to Tandy's. Obviously, the important thing with any story like that is to get the victim's point of view. In the newspaper industry, we're after printing people's stories. So the fact there was a crime is important, but we wanted to hear what they had to say. Unfortunately, the shop's shut, and so we didn't get a great deal further than we did from the police, really. So we've printed what we had from the police.
So will you follow the story up again later in the week?
Yes. When I got back to the office, we telephoned Tandy's head office. They're quite happy to be involved in the story, but just not today. They felt their staff had been through too much. So we've arranged to interview them tomorrow at 9 o'clock at the shop.
And will it still be as important a story for you tomorrow as it would have been today?
No, not necessarily, because already by today, it happened last night, so it is almost yesterday's news today, really. So tomorrow, it'll have a prominence in the paper because they were Coventry people and they have a story to tell, but it'll be further back back in the paper. It won't be a front page tomorrow or even one of our major stories. It'll just be in the paper somewhere.
We've seen you spend a lot of time working on the story to get what you've got so far.
Yeah.
However, it's got to go in the paper against the fire at the hospital that we've heard about, and of course a big story breaking even as we speak about the Rover Car Company.
That's right,
So
yes.
how important is it for you that your story gets its due prominence?
Well, I'm used to having stories chopped and changed, and 1 minute it's the lead and then something else will happen and something comes and overtakes it. Like today, at 5 to 12 we heard that Rover were having a pay freeze for all 34,000 employees, and that is of far more interest to the whole city than anything I can do. So you get used to it after a while. As long as it gets in and what gets in is accurate, that's all that really counts.
And while you're thinking about this story, of course, there are other crime stories ongoing.
Oh yes, very much so. I mean, it's never a case of doing one story at a time. There's always other stories to be considering. With the murder that happened in Rugby is something that we've got to be mindful of constantly, and there are other things happening throughout the day. Even Inspector Sawyers this morning told us about other things which had happened overnight in the city, which also had to be written up and getting in the paper.
So, Pete Mitchell, we're in the newsroom of the Evening Telegraph. Just explain to us, if you will, what is happening in this room.
Okay, well, first of all, we've got two different types of journalists, I suppose. We've got people who actually write stories, reporters, and we've also got people who are involved in the production of the newspaper, which is this lot over here, really. They are sub-editors who, and they take the stories the reporters have written and they plan them into the paper. They make sure the headlines are on, they make sure which pages they go on. They're in charge of the design, I suppose.
And are you overall the sub-editors and the reporters?
No, I'm sort of the link man between the two, really. The stories are fed through me, and I try and choose, with a bit of talks between my colleagues, where they're going in the paper, what sort of treatment we're going to give them. Is it worth a brief piece on page Humpty Dumpty, or whether it's a front page lead, really.
Now, we can see people around you in the room working very diligently at their computer screens and so on. The atmosphere seems quite quiet, but is it pressured?
I suppose people coming into a newspaper wouldn't realise that every single page of the newspaper has actually got a deadline. So, all this stuff about hold the front page, yeah, that's all very well. But actually we have to ensure that we meet all the deadlines for all the pages. In fact, I've got a deadline for every page to get it to the sub-editors. They've got a deadline to get it to the next stage of production, and they've got a deadline after that. And I guess that's absolutely essential to us, because we've got to ensure that the newspapers reach the newsagents at the same time every day.
And what happens if you miss one of those deadlines?
Well, we don't do it too often, but it costs us a lot of money, basically.
And there's a few harsh words, I should think.
A few harsh words, and quite a few phone calls from members of the public, because I think buying a newspaper is very much a habit for many of our readers. They expect it to be on the counter, perhaps when they come home from work or when they come home from school or whatever, and if it isn't there, then they want to know why.
Although in this case there will be no photograph for Sue's report, many stories do carry pictures to show more clearly what it is about. The Evening Telegraph's picture editor is Malcolm Heppel.
Well, basically the role the picture editor is to manipulate his team of, we have 8 photographers around the jobs of the day in order to get the best, most interesting, most lively picture from any job that might appear on the diary, whether that be a check presentation or whether it might be a large crash or a big fire, as we had overnight in Nuneaton, where 150 people were evacuated from a large hospital blaze. We had a photographer at 11:30 last night until 3:30 this morning. He's looking for some nice, bright, interesting pictures, not just of firemen with hoses in their hands, but of people actually being moved by ambulancemen, babies in arms, the whole dramatic bit of the day, really.
And how sensitive are your photographers to the victims of those situations? We were talking to the news editor about that earlier on.
Yeah. Yes, you have to be. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, the photographer has a job to do. It's not always as savoury as you might like it to be. I personally have been chased by, in my youth, by angry drivers when you're photographing their car, which is a bent pile of metal. But unfortunately, it's a job that's there to do, and we have to get on and do it. People like to see that sort of thing, as macabre as it may seem to others at times.
Now, when you have a picture on a page, of course, that takes out space that might otherwise be occupied by words. So who decides where the pictures go, how many of them, and how big they'll be?
I think to go back to that, you've got to go back to the old saying of one picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, as picture editor, I'm happy to say that a picture is worth 2,000 words because it is what people want to see, it what draws people's eye to the page. It makes them want to read the words, the grey matter underneath. What is this picture about? Got to read it. It's up to myself really to decide with the news editor and with the chief sub-editor what pictures go on what page, if the page is going to support that picture, is it big enough, is it the page of the right shape to support the picture, is there an advert that's going to cause a friction on that page, in which case we'll move it to another. So it comes down to a logistics planning exercise between news editor, chief sub-editor and myself as picture editor.
And you've got a lot of new technology really helping you these days, haven't you?
Journalism, photojournalism has taken massive strides in the last few years. We've gone from celluloid negatives, although we still use the celluloid negative, we don't actually produce a print anymore. The picture is transferred from the negative stage to an electronic impulse, electronic digital information. It's broken down into tiny bits of light information, which are called pixels. And these are built together on the page in forms of tiny dots, rather like a mosaic. And at the end of the day, we don't actually need a picture, a hard copy, a print to put in the paper. The whole thing is done, it's transferred down telephone lines, down cables, as electronic information.
Roger, we spent a lot of time looking at the front and inside pages of the newspaper, but the back page is very important too. Indeed, a lot of people start reading from the back page first. So what's the job of the sports editor in putting that together?
It's basically to look for the best story of the day. There's no difference to sport as to news. Peter Mitchell, I'm sure, has probably said that to you. Just a question of coming in and finding out from the team here and from the PA channels, television channels, what are the special stories of the day. At the moment, the stories are Coventry City.
As I was going to say, Coventry is a footballing city, and Coventry City doing well just now, but are other sports important?
Yes, they're all important to us. I mean, rugby union is very strong. We're very happy with our rugby coverage. We've extended that greatly in the last 2 or 3 years and getting a good response there. But athletics, cycling, all sports are important to us. But again, Coventry City, we have to accept, is one of our great providers of sales.
And with one football club dominating the area, how important is it to establish good relationships with the club?
Totally. We've had, as you know, Stuart, ups and downs with Coventry City Football Club down the years. I'm sure they'll continue, but if we're doing our job properly and Coventry City are doing their job properly, there will be highs, there will be lows. It's like a football team, it's a relationship, it's a marriage, if you like. We're fortunate at the moment we've got a great relationship going with Bobby Gold, who, at his best, is absolutely supreme. He's a great personal friend, as you know. You can't but just, like Bob, he's a tremendous guy, and he's got a good relationship going with Adam Dent at the moment, which is coincided with Coventry City doing rather well, is rather good for us.
No matter what the story, news, sport, or simply local interest, the next stage in the process is to send the now finished item to the sub-editor. He decides how each item should be laid out and what typeface should be used. Once this layout is complete, he gives the item a print code and sends it electronically to the typesetters. Their machines lay out the item, print it as requested, and then deliver it to the pre-press department. So, John, what is the job of a pre-press manager?
Just to entail that the papers go through in time, deadlines for the pre-press is the actually imposing all the pages of editorial layouts, and we just follow their layouts to the plan that they laid out, make it ready for press before printing.
As we've seen in the newsroom, there's a lot of computerization around these days. Is that in your department as well?
Exactly. It comes right through and it goes into a typesetter. The typesetter actually digitizes that information onto a piece of paper, which we call a bromide. And the bromide is the paper that is put down onto a piece of paper plan here. Yeah.
Effectively, it looks as though you've got a jigsaw puzzle laid out in front of you.
That's right. Exactly. It is like a jigsaw. In fact, it's more like a jigsaw every day because there's some pieces missing when there shouldn't be missing.
Who decides what goes where?
The editorial, they plan it and we follow their plan. Advertising have a plan as well, and if there's any adverts in the paper, they have them positioned, and then the editorial work round that. The pre-press area, the operator then follows these plans with the bits of bromide or the adverts and plan them together, just as you say, like a jigsaw.
And who decides what sort of type size it'll be?
Oh, that's editorial, that's theirs. They determine everything in the editorial. They actually do all the planning and laying out of the titles or the crossheads and everything. They determine that.
And what happens if it doesn't fit?
They have to, a sub-editor is out here and they do cuts or additions. If it doesn't fit short, they have to add things to the story. If it's too much, they then do cuts.
Now, you're all working to deadlines. If they make you late or you make them late, do tempers get frayed a little?
No. We're all one happy family.
Yep.
Once the page layout is complete and the sub-editor is satisfied that the page is ready to print, the page is taken to be photographed. The now processed negative is checked for any imperfections, which are then corrected. This is called stopping out. After drying, the negative is sent down to the plate room.
Right. Well, we're in a room with a yellow tinge to it, to say the least. Chris, first of all, tell us why the room is coloured this way.
Well, we work with light-sensitive materials, so a white light will expose the plates that we use very quickly.
And when you say plates, explain to us what you mean. What's actually going on here?
Well, we use pure aluminium plates that are coated with a light-sensitive coating that are put on these machines. And we receive the films from the process and the colour process, which we feed into the machines and then are exposed by ultraviolet light, which hardens the coating on the plate. And then it goes to a processor which is developed the soft coating, which leaves the hard coating, which is the image area. And that's gummed and washed and then bent to go onto the press.
And effectively then, what we read about in our Evening Telegraph now is coming from a photograph, essentially.
Yes, yeah, that's right, yes. Yeah, in effect, yeah, it's all negative words. Yeah.
With the plate now made, the final part of the process can begin. The press has already been running to print the lunchtime and local variations, but it's time now for the city final. And once the last plate has been safely delivered and installed on the press, this last run of the day can begin.
So, John, tell us the function of the press room. What actually is going on in here?
At the moment we're printing the Coventry Evening Telegraph. It's an 88-page paper, run collect, and we start production around about 10:30 in the morning and run on for about, supposedly about 4:30 in the afternoon. I think today we were running a little bit late because we had a lot of trouble.
It looks a very high-tech setup. How modern is it?
Oh, it's very, very modern. It is very, very high-tech. And there lies some of the problems. Unlike some of the older machines, which we were more familiar with, this is all electronic and computerized. And when things start to go wrong, it's more difficult to sort the problem out immediately. It's a process of elimination, and that's what we've been doing this afternoon.
Obviously you needed to modernise, but I guess there was a love for the old hot metal processes, wasn't there?
There was and there wasn't. The old hot metal process employed a lot more people. New technology reduces it dramatically, the need to employ.
And how fast is the paper coming off these presses? What sort of speed does it run at?
This is running at about 58,000 an hour, just over. So it's 58,000 copies an hour, but that in actual fact is reduced by half this afternoon because we're actually doing a collect mode situation. Normally, if this was running on straight, it would be 58,000 copies in 1 hour, but this will do 58,000 copies in 2 hours. It's slotted.
And you're producing copies not just for Coventry, but for the whole of the area, aren't you?
Yes, Nuneaton, Bedworth, Kenilworth, Leamington, Rugby, Warwick.
And you said that today you've had the odd problem or two. Have you had any real disasters?
Every web break or every time the machine stops, especially on a Wednesday, is a disaster. It's more so a disaster for the newsagents who are waiting for the copies. Yes, it is a disaster.
But you eventually overcome the disasters and you do get the paper out every night.
Oh, yes. We never fail to get the paper out. Sometimes with the help of the Birmingham Post and Mail.
By 3:30, nearly 100,000 copies of the paper have been printed. A fleet of vans sit waiting to distribute it throughout the city and into Warwickshire. The paper itself is now finished, but for the Telegraph staff, the work goes on. Already, preparations have started for tomorrow's lunchtime edition.
How important is a good local newspaper to a city like Coventry?
I think it's the lifeblood of in any town or city. There are something like 70 regional evening papers in the country, each of which enjoys very high sales within that community. It can give up-to-the-minute news on national and local stories, but mostly local stories, concentrating like we do at the Coventry Evening Telegraph on local stories and local happenings. It informs, It is not there to give a political bias, it is there just purely and utterly to inform people what's going on. And if it feels that something's going wrong in the community, whether it's local authority or whether it's private sector, it will say so.
Now, the Evening Telegraph is a tabloid newspaper, and we're used to hearing the word tabloid used in all sorts of words these days. Do you see yourself like the other tabloids, like the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Daily Mirror, and so on?
No, not at all. They've got a specific kind of market that they aim for. Each is slightly different. We're appealing to everybody in the area of Coventry and Warwickshire, and into bits of Leicestershire as well. There's all kinds of people there from all walks of life, doing all kinds of different things, interested in different things. So we've got to have a much wider spread of news. We can't afford to have one kind of approach to everything. We've got to reflect people's lifestyles and the life of the community. So it's going to be everything from the great and good to people's needs who are on benefits. We look to produce useful, interesting, relevant information like that, to be entertaining, to be humorous, to be serious as well. So we've got a much wider spread of things to take account of, really.
While you've been watching this programme, incidents have occurred which may make tomorrow's news. If so, you can be sure you'll read about it in the Coventry Evening Telegraph.
There was a bright light